Go ahead and turn to 1 Kings chapter 22. We are continuing our study of the life and times of Elijah and Elisha. And we're getting to the conclusion of the book of 1 Kings. Pretty much the scope of this will go to at least 2 Kings chapter 13. That's kind of the area I plan to stop at for this particular study. Last week we went through chapter 21. In fact, we did all of chapter 21. That is not going to happen again today. We are not getting through all of chapter 22. I guarantee it. We're going to take this chapter a little bit slower. You can tell I've put the whiteboard up here so I can give you some indication on how much detail I'm about to go through this morning. So settle in. We're going to be in chapter 22 for a little while. There's some really important things I think are important to understand as far as getting the context for a lot of what's going to be going on in chapter 22. I also want to mention that 2 Chronicles chapter 18 is going to have pretty much the same story, almost exactly the same. There are a couple key details that 2 Chronicles chapter 18 will bring up. I'll refer to that when those come up because I don't want to read both accounts because they're very much largely the same, but I'll reference to it when I need to. And I want to stay in Kings just for a little bit of sake of continuity. We've been in Kings this entire time thus far, and I don't want to keep jumping back and forth too much. But do be aware for this study, a lot of what we're going through in Kings is also in Chronicles. So especially this chapter, 1 Kings 22, you can find in 2 Chronicles chapter 18. Very, very similar stuff, and that will continue onward. The kind of, I would say some of the differences between Kings and Chronicles is Kings tends to focus on Israel, the northern kingdom, a little bit more, and Chronicles tends to focus on Judah a little bit more. It's just very slight differences on their focus, but not enough that we're going to be wildly out of sync. But I just want you all to be aware if you weren't already. So with that said, someone read for us 1 Kings chapter 22, just verses 1 and 2, please. Okay, so like I said, I have a lot of detail I want to go through, and if we get past these 2 verses, we're going to be good. It's going to be one of those days. So as I mentioned, this story is also chronicled in 2 Chronicles chapter 18. Most of this information is going to be the same. Again, I'll point out what details I want to get out of 2 Chronicles. But we have here this treaty that is mentioned between Israel and Aram, or I think your translation said Syria. I don't have any issue with using that interchangeably, but I'll say Aram because that's what my translation uses. That's what I'm comfortable saying. That's what's in my notes. But when I say Aram and your Bible says Syria, it's the same thing. We're not talking about 2 different places. But it talks about here that there's been 3 years of peace between these 2 nations. Do we know anything from stuff we talked about prior in this study why this would be something that's mentioned, that there is this peace here between these 2 countries? Like why is that significant in any way?
They're split, for one, and they I guess, war against each other. One was trying to tell the other what they were doing, and the other just trying to do what other people were around them.
Okay, so there is some of that, but I'm specifically thinking of 2 chapters ago, chapter 20, something that happened. Jeff, you had your hand up. Well, yeah, okay, there was a drought. Specifically, the political situation between Aram and Israel is what I'm talking about. What happened in chapter 20 that would set this up? Pat? Yes, all right. And what was the result of that battle? Oh, you guys are making me feel bad. I feel like you...
Well, they had a treaty. Israel,
there it is.
Israel and Syria had a treaty.
Okay, so yes, there we go. So when King Ahab miraculously won his 2 battles against Ben-Hadad, king of Aram, remember Ben-Hadad basically he begged for mercy not to be killed, even though he was supposed to be killed. That was what was supposed to happen. He begs for mercy. He says, I'm going to give back territory. I'm going to let you open markets in Damascus. All this stuff, just please spare my life. And Ahab agrees, and they write out a treaty. And they, according to that treaty, then he's left to go back to Syria, back to Aram, back to Damascus, whatever word you want to use. So this treaty has held for 3 years. So when it says there's been 3 years of peace, there's been a lot of fighting between these two nations. There's going to be more fighting between these two nations, but there's this kind of lull. There's this peace. This treaty has held. It has been recognized by both parties. They have not been going to war to each other. So we have to recognize things are good right now. Things are at peace. There's no reason, anyone should get their feathers ruffled. Maybe we'll talk about that in a little bit. But I want to set that stage. There's a time of peace here in Israel. That is a rare thing. Israel's almost always at war with somebody, whether it's Aram or Judah or Ammon, Moab. Take your pick. They're usually at war with somebody. But right now, there's a time of peace. So I wanted to bring that out, and that's a good thing to remember back from chapter 20, that treaty has been sufficient thus far. So I wanted to mention that. So we have this time of peace, and we have, at this time, Jehoshaphat, king of Judah, the southern kingdom, comes to visit Ahab, the king of the northern kingdom of Israel. Now, it's important to distinguish these two people. We've talked about Ahab a lot. Is Ahab a good king or a bad king? How bad is he? He is very bad. How very bad is he? He's the worst. Okay. Scripture says that. When we did our introduction to the study, his father Omri was called the worst king. He'd done more evil than all the kings before him. And then he dies, and Ahab comes to power, and it says he was more evil than all the kings before him. And then, in fact, in the last chapter we read about, when he takes and kills, well, you can say, debate, it was Jezebel's plan, but he was complacent in it. He has Naboth killed. He takes his vineyard, and verses 25 and 26 remind us that there was no king like Ahab, basically because he was so evil, not because there was no one so great as he. It was no one was so bad as he was. He's a terrible king. So we know Ahab pretty well. But Jehoshaphat is kind of on the complete opposite end of this. Jehoshaphat is actually considered to be a pretty good king. He does some things that I think are kind of like, I'm not sure I would do that. We're going to talk about one of them in a bit. But he's largely considered a good king. So I'm going to do something I don't usually ever do. I'm going to go out of order here. I'm going to skip from here. And I want to read 1 Kings chapter 22, starting in verse 41, because this talks about Jehoshaphat. And, we kind of need to know who he is for this story to make sense. So I'm going to skip to that, and I'm going to read that right now. And then when we get to that section later, we won't have to go through it again, and it'll already be done. So 2 Kings chapter 22, starting verse 41, says, Jehoshaphat, son of Asa, became king of Judah in the 4th year of Ahab, king of Israel. Jehoshaphat was 35 years old when he became king, and he reigned in Jerusalem 25 years. His mother's name was Azabah, his daughter of Shilhi. In everything he walked in the ways of his father Asa and did not stray from them. He did what was right in the eyes of the Lord. The high places, however, were not removed, and the people continued to offer sacrifices and burn incense there. Jehoshaphat was also at peace with the king of Israel. As for the other events in Jehoshaphat's reign, the things he achieved in his military exploits, are they not written in the book of the annals of the kings of Judah? He rid the land of the rest of the male shrine prostitutes who remained there even after the reign of his father Asa. There was no king in Edom, a deputy ruled. Now Jehoshaphat built a fleet of trading ships to go to Ophir for gold, but they never set sail. They were wrecked at Ezon-Geber. At that time, Ahaziah, son of Ahab, said to Jehoshaphat, let my men sail with your men, but Jehoshaphat refused. Then Jehoshaphat rested with his fathers and was buried with him in the city of David, his father, and Jehoram, his son, succeeded him as king. Okay, so there's that account. I also want to go to 2 Chronicles because, like I said, they're going to say a lot of the same things, but there'll be a few more details in here. 2 Chronicles chapter 17. And I'm going to start in verse 1. Jehoshaphat, his son, succeeded him as king. It's talking about Asa's being the him there, and strengthened himself against Israel. He stationed troops in all the fortified cities of Judah and put garrisons in Judah and in the towns of Ephraim that his father Asa had captured. The Lord was with Jehoshaphat because in his early years he walked in the ways of his father David had followed. He did not consult the Baals, but sought the God of his father and followed his commands, rather than the practices of Israel. The Lord established the kingdom under his control, and all Judah brought gifts to Jehoshaphat, so that he had great wealth and honor. His heart was devoted to the ways of the Lord. Furthermore, he removed the high places and the Asherah poles from Judah. In the 3rd year of his reign, he sent his officials, Ben-Hail, Obadiah, Zechariah, Nathaniel, and Micaiah, to teach in the towns of Judah. With them were certain Levites. I'm going to skip that. That's just a lot of names. I'm not going to be able to do that. Verse 9, they taught through Judah, taking within the book of the law of the Lord, and they went around to the towns of Judah and taught the people. The fear of the Lord fell on all the kingdoms of the land surrounding Judah, so that they did not make war with Jehoshaphat. Some Philistines brought Jehoshaphat gift and silver as tribute, and the Arabs brought him flocks, 7,700 rams and 7,700 goats. Jehoshaphat became more and more powerful. He built forts and store cities in Judah and had large supplies of towns in Judah. He kept experienced men, fighting men in Jerusalem. And then it goes to talk about his fighting men. I don't think that's a detail we need to know. To make a long story short, Jehoshaphat is a good king. He's a strong king. Things are going well for him. So if we were doing a study on specifically the kings, which I know we're kind of doing a little bit as we go through this study, Jehoshaphat would be the ones with the thumbs up. He's a good king. He does well. And he's mixing himself up with Ahab here in verse 2. Now, we could just kind of look at this and say, like, wow, this is kind of a weird combination of these two guys, hanging out with each other. Well, they do have this common ancestry, maybe that's the reason. And, they're at peace. Maybe they're trying to do something diplomatic here. There's a little bit more to it than this, and this is what the chart's for. I just want to kind of make sure we have this clarification here. Ahab, bad king. Jehoshaphat, good king. I think we're going to get that pretty easily. Now, there is a little bit more than just the fact that the scriptures I read there said there was peace with Israel. It is more than just a peace. There is an alliance between these two kingdoms. The kingdom of Israel under Ahab has an official alliance with Jehoshaphat, king of Judah. I kind of want to explain this in detail because it's going to help set the stage for why Jehoshaphat does what he does in this chapter. And I feel that kind of needs to be explained. So it's like, well, why is Jehoshaphat doing these things? Why would he agree to what Ahab is saying? Here's the reason, basically. So if we go to the account in 2 Chronicles 18, like I said, is the other side, the other account of this. In verse 1, it states that Jehoshaphat allied himself with Ahab by marriage. Of course, we know that back then, if you were royalty, if you wanted to make an alliance with another nation, marriage was the way that was done. In fact, we can go back to Solomon as being a prime example of that. His kingdom was at peace, and he had a lot of wives. So it was a lot of that kind of diplomacy. Anyway, it talks about how they are allied by marriage. We are actually able to trace this alliance by kind of jumping around a little bit in 2 Chronicles and places in Kings, or I'm sorry, 2 Chronicles and also in 2 Kings. So according to the scriptures, the son of Jehoshaphat marries the daughter of Ahab. Now, Jehoshaphat's son is Jehoram, and the daughter is, I'm not sure how to pronounce it, Athaliah? Sure, we'll go with that. Whatever you want it to be. Rose would probably know. She's really good at pronouncing these names for us. Anyway, those are the two, and they are married together. So, there you go. That's their alliance. That's how these two kingdoms are linked. So it's more than just this common ancestry. Oh, we're both descendants of Israel. We're all descendants of Abraham. We have our direct descendants are married to each other. This is the alliance that I think is being talked about here. So this is going to cause problems. I'm going to jump ahead a little bit in time to kind of explain how this becomes a problem because I want you to kind of see how this plays out. So in 2 Chronicles chapter 21, verse 6, it says of Jehoram, son of Jehoshaphat, that when he becomes king of Judah, he, quote, followed the ways of the kings of Israel as the house of Ahab had done, for he married a daughter of Ahab. He did evil in the eyes of the Lord. So you're going to see a really big change in Judah from Jehoshaphat to his son Jehoram. Judah does better than Israel, but is not immune from the problems that Israel finds itself in. Idol worship, that's the big one. And guess what? I can trace back where that influence is coming from. We'll get into it a little bit more in just a second. So that's what goes on there. The daughter of Ahab, sometimes she's referred to as the granddaughter of Omri. Of course, Omri is the father of Ahab. We've talked about that before. The daughter of Ahab who marries Jehoram is Athaliah, something like that. That's her name. I can't pronounce it. But she becomes the mother to the next king of Judah, Ahaziah. So they're married, they have kids. Ahaziah becomes king. She becomes the mother of the next king of Judah. That's, of course, references in 2 Kings chapter 8, verse 26, or 2 Chronicles chapter 22, verse 2, if you want to look that up. Then Ahaziah only rules for 1 year. I won't get into the details of what happens to him. We're going to get to that in the study later. I'm jumping ahead a little bit, like I said. He's only going to rule for 1 year. He's going to die. And when this happens, Athaliah, she usurps the throne. Instead of it going to his descendant, like it should have normally, which eventually does, but we'll get to that, she usurps the throne and becomes the queen of Israel, or of Judah, rather. So I'm going to put a little crown right there. So we have this really terrible situation here where we have the granddaughter of the king of Sidon. Remember, Jezebel is the daughter of the king of Sidon. She marries Ahab. There's that whole thing. We have a granddaughter of the king of Sidon now ruling the southern kingdom of Judah. Just think about that for a second. Imagine all the problems that are going to come with that. And if you can't imagine that, we're going to get there anyway, so I guess you don't have to. But this is going to cause serious problems, and her reign is going to last for about 6 years. And during that time, a bunch of bad things are going to happen. I'll get to the details of that later. But I just wanted to map this out to show you that why is Jehoshaphat doing these things? Well, his son is married to Ahab's daughter. This is going to cause problems. This is just a weird family tree right here. Why do we have the reach of the king of Sidon suddenly reaching into someone on the throne of Judah being a descendant of a Sidonian? Because of this intermarrying of royalty and making treaties, which, God told them not to do this. So, yeah, there you go. Fun stuff. Any comments, questions about this family tree before I move on? Bethany. So we're going to get to that. I don't interpret it to be the same. We're going to have to talk about that, though. We'll get there. I promise. But anyway, I didn't, because I could keep going with this. You guys know how I do this stuff. I got to cut off at some point. Any other things about verses 1 and 2? Go ahead, Jeff.
Interesting, we see how strengths and weaknesses and personalities affect our destiny if they're not kept, if the extremes of those things are not kept. Jehoshaphat obviously was an agreeable person.
Mm-hmm.
And Jezebel, Athaliah probably as well were not agreeable. They were drivers. They were contentious people. Contentious people are drawn to agreeable people and vice versa. But the contentious people can take over. Husband or wife, doesn't matter. That personality can be dominant. And it's real easy for someone who's, now being agreeable is a good quality. You can be a man of peace, and that's a good thing to be. So being agreeable is fine, but you always have to hold the weaknesses of your personality in check by the teaching of God's Word.
We don't want to be naive about these things.
We don't want to allow someone else to control our lives spiritually.
Mm-hmm.
We have our roles to play, and that's fine. We yield to the king and, all the things that the Bible teaches about submission, but ultimately our allegiance is to God. And so never let your strength, the strength of your personality, be without limits, or the weakness of your personality be without limits. It all has to be reined in by God's Word. go with the flow, these kind of things are going to happen.
Yeah, what is the New Testament passage? Innocent as doves, but wise as serpents. Yeah, like, so Joseph obviously makes a mistake in agreeing to this marriage. Like, if you think of like, well, what if Jehoram was not influenced by the daughter of Jezebel, who we already know is a problem for Ahab? The scripture outright says it's a problem for him. What would have happened to Judah at that point? I mean, that's one of those what if situations. We'll never know for sure. Would Judah have lasted longer? Maybe. Would idolatry have been such a problem? Probably not, at least not at that time. But certainly we can make the connections. And it kind of reminds me of when we were going through the study of Abraham, how we could see the daughters of Lot potentially being kind of the problem of the idolatry that would continue on in Moab and Ammon. We're not for sure on that, but the dots are there. It's not a hard connection. So anyway, this one's probably even more clear than that. There's obviously going to be a problem here. We will read about it in this study. We're going to get to this situation in much more depth, but just wanted to kind of give you a snapshot and see not just why Jehoshaphat is doing this, but the consequences that are going to happen from it beyond this chapter alone. So little moments like this have big effects later on, and we need to make sure that we're not ignorant of those things and short-sighted. So any other comments on these first two verses? All right, let's continue on then. Let's go back to the 1 Kings chapter 22. I'll give you all a chance to get back there if you've been jumping around with me. So I'm going to read for us verses 3 through 9, please. 3 through 9.
Their father gave them great gifts of silver and gold and precious things with fortified cities in
Go ahead, hold on. 1 Kings 22?
Second Chronicles.
Yeah, so you got to jump back.
1 Kings 22, starting in verse 3, and king of Israel.
Yeah, 3 through 9, yeah.
Sorry about that. And the king of Israel said to his servants, "Do you know that Ramoth Gilead is ours, but we hesitate to take it out of the hand of the king of Syria?" So he said to Jehoshaphat, "Will you go with me to fight at Ramoth Gilead?" Jehoshaphat said to the king of Israel, "I am as you are, my people as your people, my horses as your horses." So Jehoshaphat said to the king of Israel, "Please inquire for the word of the Lord today." Then the king of Israel gathered the prophets together, about 400 men, and said to them, "Shall I go against Ramoth Gilead to fight, or shall I refrain?" So they said, "Go up, for the Lord will deliver it into the hand of the king." And Jehoshaphat said, "Is there not still a prophet of the Lord here, that we may inquire of him?" So the king of Israel said to Jehoshaphat, "There is still one man, Micaiah, the son of Imlah. By him we may inquire of the Lord, but I hate him, because he does not prophesy good concerning me, but evil." And Jehoshaphat said, "Let not the king say such things." Then the kings of Israel called an officer and said, "Bring Micaiah, the son of Imlah, quickly."
Okay. So remember back to 1 Kings chapter 20, verse 34. Ben-Hadad, king of Aram, had made this treaty with Ahab, king of Israel, and he was at the mercy of him. One of the things he promises is to give back lands that had been taken to Israel. Now, I don't know the exact details of this treaty because I think the only detail we get is the lands my father took from your father, and we kind of talked about how that's kind of weird because we don't see any mention of Omri fighting with Aram. Not that it didn't happen, we just don't have record of that, so we don't know exactly what that means. So this can mean one of two things. Either Aram did not give back all the land they had promised, or the land that they had promised to give back, this place, Ramoth Gilead, was not included in that. I don't know which side of that to land on. Either way, guess who's willing to break this treaty to go and get it? Ahab. So he's the one that was, going to be merciful, and he'd say, "Let's sign this treaty. We'll never have problems again." Now he's ready to destroy these 3 years of peace to get this place, because it's still in the hands of the Arameans for some reason. Again, we don't know exactly why that's the case. But I want to talk about Ramoth Gilead for just a second. This is a border city on the eastern side of the northern kingdom of Israel. It was located within the tribe of Gad, but just barely. It would be kind of like this, surrounded by Manasseh on the north and the west side. It's kind of a border city, not just for Israel, but between the tribe of Manasseh, the east part of Manasseh, and Gad. Now this modern day, if we were trying to look for this on the map, this would be in the country of Jordan, the northern end of that country, but also still a border city. The modern country of Syria is right there on its northern border. So it's still a border city, but that's where it is now. Ramoth Gilead is listed as one of the cities of refuge in Deuteronomy chapter 20, or Deuteronomy chapter 4 and Joshua chapter 20. You know, if there was like something like an accidental death, someone could flee to a city of refuge. That was one of them. It's also listed to be set aside as a town for the Levites in Joshua 21. Remember, Levites did not have a tribal land of their own, but they were allocated cities that they could live in and make families, have families, and make a living and that kind of thing. So this was one of those Levitical towns. So it was a city of refuge. It was a border city. It was a Levitical town. It has all these certain special qualities to it. So it's not some nothing backwater area that no one cares about. It does have some importance, despite the fact that it's on the way eastern side of the nation. It is important, and that's probably why Ahab is a little bit upset that he doesn't have it. But he asked Jehoshaphat if he would be willing to help him take back Ramoth Gilead from the Arameans. Now Jehoshaphat is willing. He says, "My horses are your horses." He's willing to do it, but he asks for one condition: let's inquire of the Lord before we go off and do this. Great guy, Jehoshaphat. That's a smart thing. Let's inquire of the Lord first. Like I think, Jehoshaphat, whatever problems he's got, and there are some issues with his reign, but one of the good things is here he is in a northern kingdom that doesn't really care about God. Ahab is one of the worst, but he's still up there saying, I know we have this alliance, but I want to inquire of God first. Upstanding guy so far. So he asks about that, and Ahab gathers 400 prophets. Now, my translation does not say prophets of God. It just says 400 prophets. I'm putting prophets in quotes here, if you will. He asks, them, should we go to Ramoth Gilead? Should we take it? And all of them say unanimously, yes, go out, get it. The Lord will deliver it into your hand. No problem. And apparently none of these are prophets of God, at least according to Jehoshaphat, because Jehoshaphat speaks up and says, again, is there not a prophet of the Lord we can inquire of? You have these 400 men here, but at least in Jehoshaphat's mind, these are not prophets of God. And I think he's probably right about that. I have no reason to doubt Jehoshaphat here. And, when we think about hundreds of prophets, this kind of reminds me of the 450 prophets of Baal back in chapter 18 that were killed at Mount Carmel. This may be the replacements. Maybe it's the 400 prophets of Asherah that are still around. I don't know. Because they were apparently not killed at Carmel. They weren't there for some reason. We don't know. We're not given enough detail. But I think we have enough information to pretty much definitively say these are not prophets of God. And if they were, Jehoshaphat would probably not still be asking about this.
Yeah, and you kind of could wonder and surmise that Jezebel had, if she had anything to do with it, they were restored.
Yeah.
They were killed. So, yeah, they are false prophets. Doesn't say prophets of God.
Yeah, and if we go back to, I think it's chapter 18, it talks about those prophets. There's 450 prophets of Baal, 400 prophets of Asherah, and they all dine at the table of Jezebel. Again, this is sort of state-sponsored religion, and whether this is the 400 remaining prophets of Asherah that weren't killed, or if they replenished their supply of prophets of Baal, I'm sure they could easily find people who are yes men. That's not a hard thing to do. You can look at our culture today about that. So it doesn't really matter who they are, but it is true that they're probably not prophets of God. I think that's about all we need to know, and that's all Jehoshaphat really cares about. He's still looking for a prophet of God. These 400 guys are not that. So again, Jehoshaphat, thumbs up. He's doing all right. So Ahab answers that, yes, there's still one prophet of the Lord we can ask, and he identifies him as Micaiah, son of Imlah. I don't know if this is the same Micaiah mentioned when I read through 2 Chronicles talking about Jehoshaphat's character. I'm not sure if that's the same one or not. It doesn't mention his father, I don't think. It could be. But here's the thing. Ahab, he hates this guy. He doesn't want to talk to him And here's his reasons: because he never says anything good about me. He's always prophesying bad things. I don't really want to consult this guy. And like, to us, this is hilarious because we can stand here and say like, well, yeah, what are you doing? You don't follow the Lord. You're constantly ignoring instructions. You're always following after these false deities and stuff. Of course, he's not going to say anything good about you. He's a prophet of God. God is not pleased with these things. But Ahab seems to take this very personally for some reason. Again, he's got problems. We won't get into that again, but he doesn't want to consult this guy. But the interesting thing is he's going to do it. He's going to consult him because he wants Jehoshaphat's help here. I don't think this is him saying, okay, yeah, we'll submit to the Lord this time. He wants an ally in this battle, and so he's going to appease his ally. He's going to get Jehoshaphat on his side. It's like, okay, fine, we'll do what you want to do as long as you come and help me fight this battle. I think there's kind of an interesting parallel here between this part of this chapter and the previous chapter in Naboth's vineyard. Ahab really wanted that vineyard, and he was told no, and he throws this tantrum, and Jezebel helps him with that situation, quotes, gets rid of Naboth, and he goes and he takes his vineyard, and then Elijah comes and says, like, you're going to die because of this. Your whole family's going to be wiped out because of this. And you think he would learn, maybe this is time to stop demanding territory for myself. And now he's about to go out and take an entire city, and Jehoshaphat, his ally, is going to get caught up in this. And Jehoshaphat's one thing is, I want to consult the Lord. And Ahab's like, oh, not this guy again. It's like, it's almost a comedy if it wasn't so sad. And that is the thing I keep thinking about Ahab is his journey, his experiences with God and God's prophets should be leading him on a path to turning around, finding out that, hey, maybe I need to stop with these idols. Maybe I need to follow after the Lord. But no, instead, we're way past, Elijah with the drought, Elijah calling down fire from heaven. Everyone's there. Everyone sees it. We're way beyond all of these things, these great miraculous battles that he was able to win. The prophet of God told him how to do it. And yet, here he is not wanting to consult the Lord, and he's only doing it because of Jehoshaphat. And over again, you're like, Ahab, what is wrong with you? But it really shows his lack of character. He really does not want to follow God. He wants to do his own thing. And that's what he's going to do. And that's going to be his downfall. But he's doing it this one time for the sake of Jehoshaphat. So he's a super evil king. Of course, he's not going to get anything good said about him. And interestingly enough, Jehoshaphat even rebukes Ahab here about this. It's like, you really shouldn't be saying things like this. This is a prophet of the Lord. You should have some respect. Like, you, Ahab, of all people, should know the power of the Lord at this point and should respect it. I think it's interesting that Jehoshaphat calls him out on that. But Ahab concedes. He's going to go, and he says, bring him here quickly. Let's get this done. We're going to have to, I'm going to stop there because the next section we go to is going to be pretty long. But I will kind of give you, if you haven't already read the chapter, Micaiah is going to come. He is going to talk to Ahab. There's going to be some words exchanged. We'll just leave it at that. This almost seems like it could be a conversation between Ahab and Elijah. I'm not sure why Elijah is not the one that they talk about. Maybe he just hates Elijah so much he doesn't want to go to him. He'd rather have Micaiah. I don't know. But we do know Elijah is still around. We just saw him at the end of the last chapter. And he's going to be around into the beginning of the first couple chapters of 2 Kings. Why Ahab does not send for him, I'm not sure. Or maybe he didn't know where he was. I don't know. But he's not the one they go to. So we're going to talk about next week what Micaiah says, the words exchanged between them. We might even get to how this battle plays out because they do go to war. Spoilers. But we're not going to get into that. So I'm going to stop there. Instead of going way over time, I'm going to give you all a couple minutes back because usually I go way over time. So I'm not going to do that. Any final comments, questions before we close this morning? Okay. If you haven't already, read the rest of this chapter because we'll be getting into it. I'm not sure if we'll get through all of it next week. We may or may not, but we will, like I said before at the top of the hour, We will be getting into 2 Kings. My plan is to get through about chapter 13 of 2 Kings. So even though we're getting to the end of this book, this is not the end of the study. We're actually kind of about halfway through, maybe not even halfway. But we'll stop there. I think that's a good stopping point. Thank you.